in July of 2014, which was, of course, two years ago, but almost a year before marriage equality became the law of the land, the congregation of the First UU Church of Nashville received a love letter. I want to start my sermon by sharing it with you this morning because I have no doubt that this congregation has been and continues to be a source of strength and love to others in your wider community, just as the congregation in Nashville was to the writers of the following email sent to our church office. We don't always remember this, but just in being who we are, our Unitarian Universalist institutions nurture life beyond our walls. Here is that email. Subject: thank you, 25 years later. On July 15th, 1989, your church and your pastor welcomed my partner and I as a couple when all other religions and spiritual organizations treated us as disgusting, evil, and reprehensible. Your pastor married us, and he and your congregation reminded us that there were people in the world who actually practiced unconditional love and acceptance. In large part because of you, my partner and I never gave up on ourselves or on the hope that we too belonged in this life as full and vibrant participants. We raised 2 children, we continue to work hard in public service jobs, trying to give back to others in society, and we try always to pay forward what was given to us. Thank you for being brave and true to the deepest and truest spiritual principles long before anyone else had the courage to do it. With gratitude and respect, Susan and Giselle, married 25 years in the eyes of God, thanks to the courage of your congregation, on 7/15/2014. After reading this email last summer, I corresponded with Susan. She and Giselle gave me permission to share their letter in worship, and I learned that Susan had also written a blog post in celebration of their 25th anniversary. Reflecting on the unanimously positive responses she's received on her blog, which are in striking contrast to the messages she received from the world in which she came of age, Susan wrote, "The world can learn and grow. I'm convinced of this, and that the future can be brighter than anyone thinks if we respond to others with love and openness." So I will admit that I promised Doug several weeks ago that the topic of my sermon today would be the joy of yes. And I will also confess to you that it seems like the last several weeks there have been layers and layers upon things to which I want to say no. And I find myself this morning not entirely joyful. And yet I want to call us back to the yes, to the yeses in our lives, to the yeses that aren't in our lives yet but maybe need to be. And so I'm going to go ahead and forge through this exploration of the happiness, the joy, the delight, the childlike wonder we can find in the practice of yes. So, as I've been wandering through my life, feeling alternately hopeful and despairing that the world will move toward that brightness invoked in Susan's reflections, I have begun to give more attention to a certain inclination toward joy and wonder, toward delight in what poet E.E. Cummings called everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. Some of us perhaps are naturally inclined in these directions, but I tend to be a worrier. And there are seasons in which the problems of our own lives and our knowledge of things happening beyond our immediate circles make joy and wonder and yes difficult to imagine. And yet, it has been something of a revelation for me to learn that approaching life with a yes is not really any less safe than worrying about protecting and provisioning myself and my family, or remembering all the strategies I have been told can help me avoid or deal with this or that problem. I'm sure you'll have no problem believing me when I suggest that life with a little less worry can be more fun, but I'm also going to argue that joy and wonder, curiosity and delight in the newness of things and people who appear in front of us and claim our attention are far more effective in building the world about which we dream and for which we yearn. Many of us grow up in homes, churches, and a culture in general that distrusts human nature, that fearfully believes that there is something about us that if left unchecked will run amok in the world, inflicting harm on others and damning the self, literally or figuratively, to hell. This is not the only belief about human beings operative in our culture, but it is one of the dominant ones, and it is subtly pervasive. It suggests that the best or safest response to many requests springing from lived experience and the desires of individuals is no. I myself am rather good, maybe even too good at no, as anyone who lives or has worked with me can attest. No is an important and useful word. Without it, yes means less and can even be dangerous. Please, please, please do not misconstrue anything I say here this morning to mean that every question should be answered in the affirmative. And yet, when I look up from the busyness of my life and notice that I am happy or feeling that my work is worthwhile and effective, and then look for the source of that ease and joy, I am finding of late that I can trace that to a willingness to say yes. And I think I have you and Unitarian Universalism to thank for some of that. Let me explain. You may not be aware, although I imagine that you can imagine, that the office of First UU Nashville typically fields many calls every year from non-members who are looking for a wedding officiant. Since the called ministers of that congregation are typically unavailable for non-member weddings, the board there has legally recognized several chaplains for this purpose, of whom I have been one for several years. I have had the privilege and the fun of working with many couples, and based on this work, I have begun saying things like, "We UUs are people of the yes." When I first meet or talk with couples preparing for marriage, many of them come with questions or requests to which they have received or anticipate receiving negative responses from others. They are sometimes hesitant or apologetic about those requests. Can we get married even if we can't get or don't want a marriage license? Can we get married on my mother's farm in Kentucky? Can we have a service that all the guests will take seriously even if we never mention God? Can we express our beliefs without being disrespectful of our family members' beliefs? Even, can we get married in the middle of our annual Christmas party? I don't always say yes, at least not right away. We had to talk about that holiday party idea. But more often than not, I can say yes, because I serve a religious tradition and a local congregation that encourage me to be radically accepting of all people and trust me to apply our principles and purposes in freedom and integrity. So I can say, yes, I believe in the separation of church and state, so we don't have to file a marriage license. Yes, we can write a wedding service that expresses your spirituality and understanding of partnership, while also respecting other beliefs and feeling worshipful to your loved ones. Yes, we can plant a tree, light a candle, exchange vows in the backyard, involve your children, surprise your party guests. Yes, this can be important, serious business and also joyful, good fun. As often happens in my intellectual life, once I start working on an idea, I start seeing it everywhere, both in the present and in the strands of my past. Having started thinking about yes as opening up new possibilities for navigating life, I can now clearly see this theme woven through my life experiences, my observations, even the movies I've watched. Does anyone else still remember the 1995 movie Dead Man Walking? Oh, I see a lot of nods. I remember watching, back when it was new and I actually saw movies on the large screen, as Sister Helen Prejean, played by Susan Sarandon, was asked about her work with a prisoner on death row. Why are you helping her? Hearing her answer may have been the first time I sat up and noticed a real, unqualified yes. She said quite simply, because he asked. She didn't justify her work. She didn't say that she had carefully weighed the pros and cons and selected the course of action that served the greatest good for the greatest number. She merely indicated that she had recognized him as a human being, worthy of dignity and respect. He asked, she paid attention. I don't recall how Sister Helen got into it, but as I remember the movie, she did not go out of her way to look for this work. She had moved to New Orleans to work with her order among the poor, And somehow the everyday living out of her values led her to what ultimately became a ministry with convicted criminals and victims' families. Someone asked, and she was in a position to say yes, and to recognize that yes as congruent with her values and her purposes. Looking back over my life, I recognize another place in which I saw the habit of saying yes modeled, and that has been in parenting. When I was the mother of very young children, I read a lot of books and blogs and magazine articles about parenting. The ones that really stuck with me, partly because I recognized them as suggesting something new to me, were those that encouraged me to think about the difference between responding with no and responding with yes to these little folks who were, it seemed sometimes, running my life. I can't even remember now where specific ideas came from, but repeatedly these resources encouraged me to pay attention to what life feels like for parent and for child, to say yes as often as possible, to develop skill in affirming the desire or interest or need behind a request, even when the answer to the question needed to be no. This, like the idea of helping someone simply because they asked, was a little new to me at the time, but perhaps because it resonated with the best of my own experiences as a person growing up. The times, in essence, that someone said yes to me. This idea of saying yes as often as possible, rather than the bits of advice about molding or forming and correcting the young child, is what stuck with me and influenced my own best parenting efforts. Of course, not much of ordinary life, yours or mine, looks like a blockbuster movie or perfect parenting. But I have been seeing in the many layers of Unitarian Universalist life, from the individual to the congregational to our larger institutions, a number of ways in which we choose to pay attention to what arises as we go about our everyday lives, and choose to say yes to the full personhood of others, and in so saying, help to build a better future. Since I don't know your congregation well enough yet to have examples from your life, allow me, I'm just going to provide just a few brief examples that I've noticed in my work in the congregation in Nashville. I was employed for 10 and a half years, just ended June 30th, so y'all turned a new fiscal year and I turned a whole new chapter. I was employed until Thursday as the membership coordinator of that congregation. And the big question when people cross our thresholds is, am I welcome here? I get emails that say, I see you say you're a welcoming congregation. Does that mean me? And I get to answer those and say, yes, that means you. And they may have told me all sorts of details about their lives, why they're worried about whether we actually mean them too. And I can say, yes, and there are people here I want you to meet, and so would love to talk to you, and let me copy them on this email. And it is so good to belong to a congregation that has hired me to say, yes, you belong here. Yes, you are welcome here. I see in that congregation social justice outreach, and I know just because I was here once in April and I heard announcements that you all are involved in things here in Tullahoma like that. There are various needs you see and you say, yes, we will stand with you. Yes, we will do what we can to help. The Nashville congregation has started over the last several years. It's very difficult work, takes a lot of patience, but they've started to build a presence in the Riverbed maximum security prison in Nashville. Once a month, there's a Unitarian Universalist service on Friday evening. It's very hard, but the inmates who come to the residents, really I should say, who come to those services really rely on those, and they love to see those people. And the volunteers who go in are finding a whole new experience of what it means to be Unitarian Universalist as well. As I review my list, my own personal list, and I know you have your lists, but as I review my list of moments and projects that make me glad to be a Unitarian Universalist, it seems to me that our capacity to say yes is not simply a decision made in a vacuum. Our yeses, the ones that matter, the ones that feel like moments in which we recognize, oh, yes, this is why I am, why we are here. Those moments often rely on a particular set of circumstances. We can say yes in ways that matter because first, we have institutional support and resources. Weddings officiated by UU ministers and chaplains for non-UU couples happen because our UU congregations are known in the community as a resource, because we have boards that attend to state laws about who can sign a marriage license, because UU congregations encourage their ministers to educate ourselves so we're ready to say yes in helping couples of all sorts craft meaningful celebrations, because you support us in supporting folks who are not always respected fully and treated with justice. Local UU social engagement in the larger community is most sustainable when it grows out of the life of the congregation and its members, and because it is supported and nurtured within the context of the ongoing work of church committees and councils. We can say yes in ways that matter because, secondly, we have clarity about our values as expressed in our 7 principles. When someone makes a request, we don't automatically jump to yes, but the courage it takes to risk doing something new or outside the norm is bolstered by having a framework that articulates our intention to build respect for every unique individual and life circumstance, to support the search for truth, to do justice and live in right relationship, and to honor the interconnections at every level of human existence and interaction. Thirdly, we can say yes in ways that matter because we cultivate spiritual development and growth, which means, among other things, that we practice the disciplines of attention and compassion. We gather and worship to hear new ideas, to reflect on our lives, to sit together in silence and in conversation so that we learn to notice our lives, to see and to hear how we are connected and how we can most effectively respond to whatever and whomever shows up in front of us. We are all seeking assurance about belonging in this life as full and vibrant participants, to borrow Susan's words. And Unitarian Universalism provides some powerful tools for learning to enter more fully into our lives and supporting others in their own lives. Beneath our persistent questions about belonging lies a more basic question. Am I a real person? Ideally, the answer to that question would always and everywhere be an enthusiastic yes. But often, the response to am I really a person of worth and dignity is some variation of, oh, yes, of course you are, but, it would be best if you would just fill in that blank with look normal, love someone of the appropriate gender, follow all the laws even when they're wrong, speak using acceptable words, not annoy or embarrass others with reminders of your suffering, not ask too much right now. You may notice that this sort of automatic yes is actually a no. In effect, it fails to really see the other person and questions the importance of their experience and their needs. In my mind, a real yes means you have dignity and worth. Your experiences, feelings, and thoughts are as important to you as mine are to me. It means that you know yourself better than anyone else does, and you are responsible for yourself. Any true help I can offer supports you in living your life and making your choices. A real yes means that I will honor your understanding of the sacred in your life and join you in protecting, nurturing, and celebrating it. Marilyn Robinson, in her novel Gilead, writes, "There are 1,000 reasons to live this life, every one of them sufficient." In my experience, the moments in which we recognize one of the 1,000 reasons to live this life come when we give up the project of managing others, and perhaps ourselves as well, although I have more trouble letting go of that project, and instead pay attention and say yes to the possibility of building and supporting real relationship. Quite often, these moments are opportunities for joy, and noticing them is downright fun. But saying yes isn't always that easy. Sometimes it requires courage and discipline and careful discernment. But it is always good work. Work that makes me glad to be a human being and glad to be a Unitarian Universalist. Thank you for being part of this Unitarian Universalist movement that has said yes to my life and to yours, a movement that at its best supports us all in learning to bring our yeses to a world in need of more love, more justice, more hope. Susan wrote, "The world can learn and grow. I am convinced of this, and that the future can be brighter than anyone thinks if we respond to others with love and openness." May it be so. May we be so.